My dad's name is Herbert Goedecke. He was always thinking ahead, and his slogan that he always taught us kids was, "How do you know you can't do that until you try it?" He wouldn't let us not do something unless we tried. He says, if you fail, so be it. But you're going to find out you can do it most of the time. And he was right.
My father was 9 years old when he came over, and obviously they had to go to school so they could learn English. And he learned pretty well because he did not have an accent. I believe he got through grammar school okay. And by the time it was time to go to high school, depression was in full force and things were getting tight. And my grandfather really couldn't handle the business all himself and pay employees, so my father started working with his dad.
He started in the business about when he was 14. When the Depression hit, there were a lot of people that could not afford to have their house painted. We ended up really kind of scrounging for work. Grandpa, I know, didn't have many employees at first. And his dad, my grandfather, was sick with lead poisoning and couldn't work.
Back in the day with the lead paint, the lead would clump at the bottom of the cans, and you had to physically go in and actually massage the paint with your hands to break up the chunks of white lead in order to get it fully dispersed. It wouldn't stir in. And so they had a lot of lead contact, and so his father had gotten lead poisoning and was sick, and he did recover from that. But at the time, Herbert was 16, and he needed to keep that business going, and so he keep the guys working. And so he found out that there was an opportunity up at Dartmouth College to paint the dormitories.
My dad was, you could say he was outgoing, and he was not afraid to tackle anything.
He had to have one of our men drive him up there because he was too young to have a license. Couldn't drive.
And that was before the interstate highway system, so he made his way all the way up to Dartmouth and bid on the project at 16.
Put the bids together, bid the jobs, we got the jobs, a contract that, well, nowadays would have been like a $100,000 contract. Why they would put all of that faith in a 16-year-old boy? He must have been extraordinary. What else can I say? My dad was a good salesman, and he was smart. He knew what they wanted and they needed, and he filled the bill. It was a huge job for a relatively small crew that we had. Consider at that time, nobody was doing they weren't even doing roller work. They weren't spray painting for sure. It was all brush work.
The men painted up there for quite a while, more than a year, painting all that infrastructure. And that kept the family going, and it was a real blessing.
That carried us through that terrible period when my grandfather was sick. Not only did it keep us alive as a business, but it kept a whole bunch of people that worked for us alive, because I think we had somewhere between 20 and 30 people working on that job. So we were kind of an economic engine in the area for a lot of people to survive through the Depression. It's a story I'm very proud of. I'm proud of my dad. I'm proud of the fact that my grandfather had taught him so much. Of course, he had to drop out of high school at that time, and so that was kind of sad. But being a smart guy and a go-getter, he learned in other ways, and he was a very successful businessman.
Herbie and George worked together for many, many years. George was older, and Herbie was the youngest of the children. So, when George retired and handed over the business, he was still young. And then, actually, when World War II came about, Herbie was working at Grenier Field, and George had to had to come back and kind of keep the business going while Herbie was doing his service for the war.
He worked at Grenier Air Force Base as a mechanic on fighter planes and bombers. They would get the planes prepped before they would be shipped over to the front. They would come right from the factory to Grenier, and they would go over the planes. And actually, at the time, he said they actually found planes that had been sabotaged, and they had to make repairs before they were shipped over.
He was setting up the bomb sights, the Nordstrom bomb sights, which is a very complex mechanical device which was used to bomb. Very mechanical, and you'd have to set them up just right. And the word came out that, Goedecke, he's not doing a good job on this. He's a German. I think he's screwing stuff up. So what happened was, word got out, they did an investigation, and they looked at all the equipment. They analyzed how precise did he set these up. Not only was his workmanship good and adequate, but it was better, and better than everybody else, because you could set them up to such precision. And he got a promotion. So much for that. But he was obviously discriminated on that. It probably didn't feel good that they thought he was screwing up. He did his duty in World War II and served his country with honor.
My father was very clever, and he learned fast. Very similar to my nephews.
So a really interesting fact that me and my grandfather, Herbert Goedecke, have in common is that we're both aircraft mechanics. So what happened was, when me and my brother were in high school, the business really was struggling, and we realized we need to strike out on our own, and the business may not be there for us. So I went to school to become a certified aircraft mechanic, which I completed. And it's kind of funny that I went down that route too, because it's like, how did that happen?
Right, and because we didn't grow up knowing that Herbert was an airplane mechanic. Like, no one ever talked about that.
No one did, yeah. And it's funny because I have his textbook, which I really wish I had when I was in school. I got that later from my uncle. And, it's like an older version of the same textbook that I had in aviation school, and it's quite fascinating.
It just goes to show that, like, you and Herbert really are cut out of some very similar cloth, that you guys both did and were certified to do the same job.
It's pretty fascinating.
It's very fascinating.
It's really interesting.
After that period of time, when he was no longer in the military, he joined his dad back in the business. And I know that was officially George Goedecke & Son at that time. So my dad worked with his dad, and he learned all the skills and of the trade. They worked together and up until the time my grandfather retired.
I'm sure that Herbert felt a huge weight to carry this successful business on and move that forward. But he kept that business going with excellence and
grew
a reputation. And grew it, yes.
And he was an innovator too, getting into doing draperies and other things, like, the drapes at the library, that he learned how to silk screen so he could make custom fabric for that project.
So the Goedecke team was doing restoration work in the Manchester Public Library. There was this need for screen printing. Now, Herbert had never done screen printing, but he read about it, and he bought all the equipment, and he was able to replicate the original screen printing on fabric that they needed to make this restoration complete.
I never even heard of silk screening, but we had a screen that was made up. I don't know how Dad got it made up, but some artist did it, and it had scenes from New Hampshire, and this was for the New Hampshire room in the city library. And so we made this fabric, and then we made it into draperies, and everybody thought the draperies that came out for that job was fabulous. So suddenly we were in the drapery business too. We took on all kinds of jobs through the years, different things like that. Get ideas from different people and then see how we could make it all fit together.
During those periods of time, there was a lot of wallpapering that was done in homes, and you didn't paint walls. Now, when it came to wallpapering, my dad was a speed demon. I can remember at times in later years when I was older, and my job was to paste the paper. I could barely keep up with him. He hung it so fast, and it was so perfect how he cut it. It was just amazing. I still can't get up to this day how he ever worked so fast doing that type of work.
You know, gold leafing. Gold leafing was always done with these little pages. So he contacts the gold leaf manufacturer and says, "Can you make these in big sheets?" And they're like, "Sure." We've never had anyone ask that. And so he innovated, found the new way to do it, and getting like these massive sheets of gold leaf, which would allow him to get the job done better and faster.
We did something called canvas ceilings, where a lot of the houses had the old horsehair plaster, and it would be cracked, and the ceilings would be all cracked. If we patched it so it wouldn't fall down, and then we put a molding around the edge, and we stretched a canvas cloth that we had sewn together, we would size it, which would shrink it, and it'd be absolutely without blemish. Some of these canvas ceilings are still in existence in some of the finer homes in the north end of Manchester.
One of the big churches in Manchester, the Greek church, what you've ever seen is this white dome of concrete, and it's painted, and they had to paint that. And I look at that, and you kind of wonder how they would stage that. And they said it was difficult because it was tar coming through, and they had to treat things different ways because of the waterproofing. But to be able to paint that white is some feat. But they were good at figuring out how to stage things and being able to get these huge projects done.
We tiled about 5 different bathrooms. This was a new area my dad was getting into. But we would put all the tile up, grout it, and we learned how to do that stuff. And he would sometimes bid on jobs, not knowing exactly how he was going to do it. And if you try to do it in a conventional way, you'd lose money. But in the process, he would figure out a labor-saving device or method or a totally different way of doing the job, and he would come out ahead, and he was still, the perfection and the quality of the work was there. It was just something so amazing to see.
You know, when we talk about Herbert and the confidence that he had, he definitely instilled that in his children. It's just interesting to see how that confidence was built in to my dad and how that's been built into us. You know, that same attitude of like, when a customer asks us to do something or has a crazy request, we look at it and go, you know what, let's come up with a way to do that.
His basic philosophy was, if someone else can do it, how hard can it be? And I think that is so great because the whole idea of never doing something before is never a reason not to do it or not to try.
One of the things I always admired in him was when business was slow, and there was always little recessions here and there, and there wasn't enough work, he would actually walk down the street, check houses, knock on doors. He didn't want any of his men to go without a paycheck. And not only that, you wouldn't want to lose any skilled help because you didn't have the work for him. And that was one thing I've always admired.
He was extremely fair to all the employees. He almost never criticized the men. If they weren't doing something right, he'd show them how to do it better or faster, so the job would get done and be more profitable or look better. I think the men really loved him, and they were very, very loyal to him.
I mean, I think he really continued what George had done, and just that quality was always such an important thing. Like, do the best job you can. So they were known for that. They were never the least expensive, but they were known as some of the very best at what they did. You know, they were not afraid to sand and scrape and burn off the paint to get it so that the next paint job would last. So, you know, it's interesting, South Main Street Congregational Church, which is now Faith Bridge Church in Manchester on South Main Street. The paint job that Herbie and the Goedecke team did is still on the walls. The last person to paint that sanctuary was the Goedecke team. And I mean, that's well over 50 years, 60 years ago.
My father was really a skilled craftsman and a perfectionist. He also was a wonderful dad. He used to take us with him when he estimated jobs, and even during the day when they were doing work at place, we would go and he would follow up and see how the men were doing and check up on the work. So we had quite a bit of experience of seeing what he did. And it was a great thing that we could sit down and we could talk with him. We could learn that way.
This is the kind of dad I had. I knew he was extraordinary because he did everything with us. Camping and hiking, worked in scouting with us, took us skiing. That's where my love for skiing started. He helped my two older brothers to get their Eagle Scout award. We all ended up going to college and doing well, getting good jobs.
He was a hands-on dad, and he did things with them, built boats and went water skiing and did adventures.
All the kids looked up to my dad, and he treated everybody wonderfully. You know, even some of the kids that were kind of bratty.
He was also very active in community things. So, for example, he did acting at South Main Street Congregational Church. He was also a state representative.
National Painting and Decorators Association.
He was the president of that.
His civicness with, but being like a founding member of the West Manchester Rotary Club.
Yeah, very, very active in the community. So he did a lot of things other than the business. He gave back a lot.
Alan's dad was energetic. He was always whistling, and Alan has some of the same characteristics, like being late.
Mom would say, I hate it when your dad is late for something. We'd have the whole car loaded on our way up to the lake. And so that'd be my mom, all the food, all the gear, my two brothers, myself, and my dad said, well, I gotta stop at this customer's house. It'll only be a minute. Well, an hour later, we'd finally get going.
I remember an example at his family house. His mom was having a party, and where is Herbert? Nowhere in sight. The party's starting, and I'm sure his mother was getting kind of aggravated because he wasn't there. And the next thing you know, he's walking down the stairs all dressed and everything. He had crept up the back stairway of the house, managed to get a shower, get dressed, and came down the stairs like it was no big deal. So that was kind of the guy he was. He was a very neat guy.
I've never heard anyone say anything negative about Herbert. Just never. People always talked about, what a wonderful man, who loved his family, did good by people, was honest. And, that's the reputation that's so wonderful. Yes, the quality and all that, but his integrity as a person and what he did in the community for his family, just a wonderful man.
He was always my hero. We had a big snowstorm. We had a very small driveway, and it was right on the edge of the Varney Street. So there was not much place to throw the snow, so made one big pile. While my dad was shoveling the snow on that pile, my brothers and I were digging out a cave on the bottom. At some point, I was inside this cave and the whole thing collapsed. when he found me and pulled me out, I thought I was a goner. I was probably only 4, maybe 5 years old, but my dad saved me, and somehow I always knew Dad would be there, for me. But my dad was a really special guy. I loved him dearly. And probably the best father you could ever grow up with.